Yo, welcome back to the Further Your Lifestyle podcast, conversations on lifestyle, passions, and hustles. My name's CLFurlong. I am your host, and I'm super thrilled to be back here with a solo episode. So it's just you and me chit-chatting today, and I've actually had a lot of feedback from a number of you guys who are enjoying the podcast. I reached out the other week and I asked for some folks to come back with some feedback, what you're enjoying, what you're not, and a number of you have said amazing things regardless. And some of you also mentioned how much you are enjoying the solo episodes as well. So I'm going to try and do these a bit more, and whether it's two guests and then me, or a couple of me and then a guest, just to spice it up and keep it fresh. And today's episode is all about change. That is the topic. That's what we're talking about. And I think it's a very important topic of change. And there is a saying, or it might even be some lyrics now, that constant change is here to stay. Now, before we jump into it, I appreciate you being here. If you are new here, we are on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all those great places. So you can get comfy, you can listen however you like, or if you didn't know, now you know. So let's jump into it. So as I said, constant change is here to stay. And it's a bit of a saying that's been going around for years. And like I said, there is some lyrics to that as well. But depending on how we apply the lens and perspective to this statement, I believe that it can always be narrated to how we like to think of it. Now, we can always be thinking about things positively. We can always have a negative tone to things as well. And that's really how we go about doing our lives. It really comes down to perspective, or how we approach things, our attitude, and the way that we want to handle things. And that's really what I want to talk about today, but predominantly around change. So in the last week or so, I've actually had some thoughts of my own, and I've been working at how I want to change some things for myself. And I thought, well, why not? Let's have a chat about it. And the big question that I want to ask you today and we're going to discuss it, we're going to dive into it, is how do you manage change? Do you drive it? Do you ride it? Or do you avoid it? And I think these are three areas which, they probably do have some level of crossover, and they do swirl back to each other. But I think they're important questions to ask yourself, not necessarily because you're doing it wrong, but to help you understand maybe how you're managing change. So let's get into it. Number one, driving change. So driving it would essentially mean that you're the one driving the change. You're the one in control. You're the one driving the vehicle of the change. So you're leading into the direction that you want to go. You're helping yourself arrive to the destinations of opportunity, or whatever it is that you want. So usually this can be found by taking action, whether it's from us creating something, or when we see opportunity arise, we take action, we go after it, and we make it happen. It's about executing. It's about making a defining decision. I know sometimes when it comes to change, it's the decision-making process, and it can be hard to make a definitive decision. It's also about setting goals, intentions, and seeing it through. That's how we drive change. That's how we lead it. That's where we take control and see where it can go. There's so many perspectives around this, and one of them is, making sure that you're just controlling the things that you can control. And one of those big ones is change, which come our way, and sometimes when the change comes, it's a bit out of our control, but there's plenty of things that we can control. So I think when it comes to taking control and managing change, it's actually about, well, what can you take control of? So I think when it comes to taking control and change, it's about, well, when change occurs, when something happens, there is always going to be things that are out of our control. But what can you control? What can you drive? What can you use from this to help you get to where you're wanting to go? And it actually also then splashes over or spills over to point number two, which is riding change. So these are like riding the waves as the change occurs. So it might be pivoting, it might be adjusting, it might be leveraging the ins and outs as they come. And they won't always be the best, they won't always be perfect, but they will be a ride of lessons. And I think, if anything, in the last couple of years, being 2021 at the moment, we've all learned that things can change very, very quickly, and they can be out of our control, as mentioned before. But it's then, how do we ride that? How do we control the things that we can control? And in some sense, it is about driving them. But when it comes to riding, it's all about how you're, getting on board with it, how you're managing that very moment. And I think when things do happen and they're out of our control, there are many things which are in our control, because due to the circumstances, we can manage that. And some examples of this might be how we're responding, how we're reacting, how we're thinking about it, or how to think differently. How do we approach it? How do we adjust? How do we apply ourselves? How do we then go ahead and execute? You see, it's like if you think about it from a workforce perspective. When the pandemic hit, that meant that a lot of people had to start working from home. There was businesses that were already equipped for this, so they didn't have to change anything. They were ready to go, and they were able to just ride the wave and help other businesses continue to do this or start to do this. And then there was the businesses which had no idea how to operate, I guess, location independent or from working from home. They didn't have the infrastructure. They didn't have the processes in place. They didn't have maybe the trust with their employees. So that was something that they had to, I guess, it forced them to change, and they could have decided, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to push back, or, they decide to still try and operate within a building. And then you've got government policies, you've got restrictions, you've got people not wanting to be and not being comfortable. So how they decided to ride that wave of change was up to them. There was people also that lost their jobs. In this circumstance, that sucks, right? To lose your job. But now they could either just sit around and mope about it and complain and la-di-da-di-da, but if they took action and were able to ride that wave, that might have meant that this is your chance to take action. This is your chance to do that thing you've always wanted to do. This is a chance to take a chance on you and ride that wave of opportunity. So I think with that perspective, the wave may be that opportunity of a lifetime as well that comes our way. It might be a door opening. It might be someone offering a new job. And sometimes we don't weigh it up. We don't give it an opportunity of thought. The wave may also be a huge impact that pushes us to think outside the box. AKA, it's been the pandemic. A lot of things have had to change in the last 1 to 2 years very, very quickly. And it pushes us outside of our box. It pushes us outside of the norm. And it's pushing us to be uncomfortable or get uncomfortable. So I think riding the change, it might be short-term, it might be long-term, or it might be actually just continuing to do it as things come. And I think this is a familiar thing with a lot of people, but maybe for some it isn't. And then the third point around change, which is avoiding change. Look, I get it. Sometimes we tend to avoid change, and it can be even hard to digest when these things come at our faces. They come into our life, that is change, by the way. And it can be hard to digest, it can be hard to comprehend, it can be hard to even understand, well, what am I going to do now? But avoiding it because maybe you're scared, you're worried or stressed, it's not the answer, right? Just to put the defensive mechanism up and push away and saying you won't have anything to do with it. I think even understanding, educating, and being willing to listen is going to give yourself a chance to fight through it. And my encouragement around that would be, give yourself a chance to change the narrative. Yes, there's a lot of things that we can't control. There's a lot of things which are out of our control, but there's also a lot of things that we can, as mentioned, we can either drive or ride when it comes to these kind of things happening unexpectedly. It's all about letting yourself be the one driving or the one riding it, right? You shouldn't let it dictate you on the musts or the can'ts. Because, if people had given up when they were said this can't happen or this won't happen or now we can't do that, well, then a lot of things wouldn't have happened. And I've got a good example of this is during the pandemic, this year, it's the year that I've taken a chance to build out this podcast, to start my own business, to do all these different hobbies and dreams and goals, running a 50K or training for a 50K at least. And that event has changed 3 times. I've had to change my running plan. I've had to extend my training. That has meant that, when I thought it was going to be in September and now it's in December, I could have given up and said, nah, I'm not going to do it anymore. No, I've adjusted, I've pivoted. I've had to go through some long, grindy runs, but I've still kept to what I've wanted to achieve and adjusted along the way. I could have avoided the change altogether and just said, no, not doing it. I didn't want it to dictate me because there's so much more there that I wanted to do. And then when it comes to building a business during a pandemic, that is no easy feat because, you're not able to do certain things. You can't interact with people. We're restricted to certain bounds and limits and things like that. But I could have given up, or I could have said, no, I'm not going to do this. I've had to pivot. I've had to adjust. I've had to change the way I operate. And that's what it's all about. Is I'm not here to say that it's easy, and I'm not here to say that it's not going to be hard. But what I do want to say is that if you're just giving up and avoiding the change and not embracing it and seeing how you can leverage it, then you're missing out on a huge opportunity. And you're also missing out on seeing how you can flip it and taking back control. I feel like the more that we avoid change, the more frustrated we're going to become. And I'm not saying we should accept change off the cuff and just go with it. What I'm trying to say is, how do we take back control in the things that we can control in that whole ecosystem of change? And I want to reiterate that, we've seen it over the last 2 years, 2020, 2021, it was a big year for everyone, or it's been a big couple of years for everyone. And people lost their jobs, people started their passions, lives were lost, and, it's very unfortunate. And we've learned so much, we've learned what's important to us. We've learned, the simpler things in life and how we want more of that. And as a society, we've changed, we've adapted. Some people don't like that change. I get it. And that's okay if you don't like it. It's more around, well, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to navigate through it? And how are you going to continue to take back control of the things that you can control? And a small little side note, for me, I wasn't in that situation where, things changed for me out of my control. I realized that unless I was going to take control of ripping off the Band-Aid, stepping away from a 9 to 5 and chasing a dream and pursuing some goals, it was never going to happen. I could have waited around till, I got fired or something happened and I got laid off, or, it'll happen in a couple of years, or if I just do this, that will happen, all these excuses, all these ideas. But a lot of it was all hearsay. It was all just ideas. And I realized that, well, sometimes it's not about bad change. Sometimes it's also about wanting change. And I was avoiding making that change because I was scared, I was worried, I was concerned. But it actually meant that taking something that I was comfortable with, ripping off the Band-Aid to become uncomfortable, to go on a pursuit of happiness, if you will, or a pursuit of something. And that's how the podcast started, right? And if I didn't take that big step of, making a change and giving up on avoiding change, then we wouldn't even be here having this conversation. And I think if I had never done it, well, then I would have regretted it. And I knew that. So weighing those kind of options up and understanding, well, it's not just about change that occurs, but it's also about the change that you can make happen and avoiding it. Because sometimes we just put it off and we ignore it because we're too scared or we're too comfortable. And I think at the end of the day, when you weigh it up, you realize how important to make that change, to take control of that change, is going to be a life-changing event for you. So, a big recap. How do you manage change? Do you drive it, do you ride it, or do you avoid it? And I think that's the big question to ask yourself. Go through and understand, are you driving it? Go through and understand, what are you driving? Go through and understand, are you riding it? What are you riding? How are you riding it? Or how have you been able to ride it? And 3, are you avoiding change? Is there something that you want? Are you wanting to run? Are you wanting to lose weight? Are you wanting to save a little differently? Are you wanting to budget? Are you saving for a house? Are you wanting to invest? Are you wanting to learn? Are you wanting to learn how to cook? Are you wanting to finally start drawing? Are you wanting to build that business, start a side hobby, start a side hustle, start a podcast? Is there something that you are avoiding in doing? Or has change occurred and you're avoiding the ability to adjust, adapt, and take back control of the narrative? I appreciate you being here. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to bridge this conversation. And if you want to chat more, you can reach out on Twitter at Further Your Life. You can reach out on Instagram at Further Your Lifestyle, or you can drop us an email at hello@furtheryourlifestyle.com. Of course, if you are watching this on YouTube, you can drop a comment below. More than happy to continue the conversation about this or anything else for the matter. Otherwise, I really do appreciate you being here, and you have a wonderful day. Cheers. Now, if you didn't know, we do have the podcast merch, and this is with a key focus of enamel pins. Now, if you haven't checked these out, make sure you do, because the intent of these are really just to be a small token and a reminder for you to charge on, to push on, and to further your lifestyle. Whether it is a gift for someone else to encourage them, or maybe to inspire them, or maybe it's a way to motivate yourself, or you can simply just make a purchase to simply support the podcast, which would be greatly appreciated. We do also have some sweaters and some long tees, so make sure you check it out. Link in the description and in the show notes. Really do appreciate it. Cheers.